Hello, UK Crime Book Club, and hello, author Michael Lynes. It's lovely to have you back with us to talk about your latest book, The Red Citadel.
Yeah, hello, and thank you for having me back. It's great, a really, real pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about this, the third and final instalment?
Okay. Yeah, it is the third. I'm not sure if it's the final. That's
Oh,
part of
that's
the thing
good.
I'm wrestling with at the moment. Um, it's the third installment. The first one was called Blood Libel. I was lucky enough to win a prize for that one at the Emirates Literature Festival, where I am in Dubai. Second one was called The Heretic's Daughter. They're set in turn of the 16th century, so around about 1500 or so, Andalusia in Seville and Granada. This one is specifically set in Granada, and the Red Citadel refers to the Alhambra, which any of you who've been to Granada would know about. It's a huge fortress, palace, castle, magical place in Granada. And there are a series of historical thrillers stroke mysteries. I'm never quite sure which one I'm writing, but I think I'm settling for historical thrillers, crime thrillers, based on the Isaac Alvarez family, specifically Isaac Alvarez, who's the main investigator, the lead character, and his family, and what's happened to them, their journey over the 5 or 6 years that the trilogy takes. So that's the bare bones of it. This one is a story about finding out what Isaac Alvarez does or doesn't do to his main nemesis, who is a real person from real life called Thomas Torquemada, who anyone who knows about the Spanish Inquisition will know he was the main inquisitor. So they've had a battle over the 3 books, and you get a resolution to that battle in this book. But it's also set in Granada at a time of great political religious upset, and it's what happens to the family in Granada at that time. That's the other part of the story.
It's quite a lot going on. So, did this take a lot of research, planning, maybe changing some things around when you got to, after the first draft?
Yeah,
It seems like it's quite involved.
yes. And that was something I wrestled with in the writing of it. Is there too much research? Is there too much stuff going on? I was trying to make it as fast paced as I could. I was also trying to tie up quite a lot of story threads from the previous 2 books, whilst also making it possible for someone to read as a standalone. I think I've achieved that. I'm not sure 100%. Readers will tell me that. The problem when I
I have completely lost Michael.
see your still blank there.
So I'm getting some
I'll
little
keep on
bits of
talking.
sound, but I've completely lost you. I've got a frozen screen and I'm getting patchy sound through.
Okay, I was carrying on talking. I wasn't sure whether I was. It kept on ticking over. The camera kept on ticking over. So, yeah.
Hopefully, everybody else could hear your answer.
Okay, I'll kind of repeat half what I was saying. So what I was saying was, yes, lots of research, but one of my kind of things I've learned is too much research just turns readers off. You want to know, you want to have the confidence that the author has done their research, but you don't want to read it really necessarily. So I think I've got better at putting less research on the page. But inevitably, if you're going to call something historical fiction, then there has to be some research. You have to show the reader, because they expect that. That's part of what they're reading the book for. Also the crime stuff, also the thriller stuff, also the family stuff. But I think I've got better at not having so much of it on the page, at just having the right amount of stuff to inform the story and keep the reader turning the pages and give them an enjoyable experience. But yeah, it does require a lot of thought, a lot of planning, a lot of reading, most of which you don't actually use. It's the kind of analogy of I'm sure lots of other writers use this analogy, the compost heap. You know, you're throwing stuff onto the compost heap, and then it seeps out and into your writing, hopefully at the right time and in a way that's helpful to the story. But it was quite complex. It's also the second half. Book 2 and book 3 were conceived as one book, if you like, chopped in two in a way. So it completes the story in book 2, and it completes one possible cycle of the Alvarez family.
And Donna said hello. Hi, Donna. I had to go and have a look who it was because it comes up as Facebook user. It must be difficult deciding initially what detail to put in, because it's clear that this is a subject that you are knowledgeable about and that really interests you. So
yeah.
When you're finding everything so interesting, just choosing the small amount of details just to give enough of a hint without it being a textbook, like you said, that must be quite difficult.
It is, but it isn't if you think about the reader and you think about the story. The problem I used to have right at the beginning, you know, sort of 5-6 years ago before the first one, was thinking as a writer. But you can't do that. If you want people to pick up your books, spend time, spend money, you've got to think like a reader. So now what I do when I write is to get the story down. In book 1, I would fuss over historical details and go off and get lost in a rabbit hole of researching something. Now, what I do is I write the story and then put a note in the margin, find out if this is true, chase that bit of research, and I do that at the end. So because I've got the universe now, because I've got the framework, because I've got the characters, that's all embedded. I can just run off with them and then come back and make sure that the details are correct. Having said that, some details, especially because I'm looking at Spain in the early 16th century, there's not as much available on that as there would be for England. So, you know, Tudor books, Elizabethan stuff, there's so much available. So that gives me a bit of a get out clause to make up stuff, because nobody can actually say, well, that's historically inaccurate. And secondly, some of it is historically inaccurate. Most of the dates in there are correct. Most of the details actually happened, not necessarily in the order that they happened, not necessarily at exactly the same time. But that's to serve the story. I do it to serve the story. I mess about with stuff to make the story that I want to tell better. And I wouldn't apologize for that. I used to really worry about that and make sure it's got to be historically accurate. But it's not a work of historical research. It's fiction. I'm making it up. I'm allowed. And if some readers don't like it, then they don't like it. But
you can't please everyone.
No, but I'm also very clear about that in the books, that, you know, 80% of this is accurate. Some of it isn't. Some of it I've made up because that's my job. And it's my book and my universe, and I can have fun doing what I want to do if I think it's going to make the story better.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense, because if having certain dates and certain places and certain events in the right order is going to diminish the story, then why would you do that?
Yeah, and if I'm thinking it's going to be more exciting if I do this rather than that, and it's going to make a better reading experience, then I'm going to do that. And I'll put a note at the back saying this didn't happen, then it happened, then I changed it. And, you know, the reader accepts that or doesn't accept that. And I think most readers of historical fiction don't have a problem with that at all. They expect that. They expect to have for you to show the confidence in your era, and you do know your stuff up to a point, but they know some people are, some historical fiction writers are actually historians. I mean, Stephen Virapan is as an actual historian. He writes the Anthony Blank crime thrillers. But David Bishop, who's just won the historical crime fiction award at the CWA, he is a screenwriter and academic creative writing tutor. He's not a historian at all, and he's writing a series set in Florence in the mid 1500s. So you get a variety of people doing a variety of things, and it's fiction. It's for pleasure.
Yeah, and if it wasn't pleasurable, if you weren't enjoying writing it because you felt like you had to have things in a certain order in a certain way, then that would surely come across, and that isn't what comes across at all.
Yeah,
you clearly very much enjoy what you're working on.
Yeah, and if you don't, why would you put in the soulless, soul destroying? Well, they're not soul destroying. That's an exaggeration, but it is quite hard work, and I feel embarrassed in a way to say that, because lots of people do real jobs and work, in real offices and commute and do back-breaking work and do hard stuff, and there's me sitting at a desk typing at a computer, dreaming and looking out the window and calling it hard work. But anyone who's actually written a whole novel will know that it is hard work to write something at least credible and at least decent. Takes a lot of thought and a lot of hard work to actually get. And particularly if you set yourself up to do historical fiction, you are adding on that other layer of research that you have to do. So, if you're not enjoying it, then why bother?
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think it's hard work, and I do think it's a proper job. And I think a lot of authors have that guilt of
yes, absolutely,
of saying that it's they don't feel like it's a proper job sometimes, because they get to sit and stare out the window and spend a lot of time thinking, and they'll go and take the dog for a walk and have a good think, and it's all part of the job, though, isn't it? It's all part of it.
I think being an author, I didn't really realize this when I started out to write. I've only recently realized, that there's a difference between being a writer and an author. And I know it sounds obvious, but actually now I've tried it. Being an author is a lot of hard work, especially in the last 10, 15 years, when you're having to do an awful lot of marketing yourself, self-promotion, which for a lot of writers, and most of us are introverts, doesn't come easily. It's not easy to do this stuff, and I think most writers are fairly humble people and find it difficult to keep boasting about their stuff, which is what you have to do. You have to keep your stuff in the public eye. You have to be on a presence on social media, whether you are traditionally published, self-published, or hybrid published. It's just what you have to do. And that plus the writing, I think, is where it genuinely becomes hard work.
We've just had top sausage in the comments, which I know means Alex is watching.
It must mean Alex is watching. Right, great, yeah.
And Sarah said good morning as well. Hi, Sarah. So you started this trilogy effectively, but now you do think there might be more books, and that's what you're kind of considering.
Yeah, I'm kind of wrestling with the direction for the series. It does basically, at the end, without giving anything away, it does tie up quite a lot of things, but it also opens some doors to shifting the series to England, for example. I also, over the course of the last two books, introduced a couple of younger characters, child characters, Juana and Martine, who are twins, who become Isaac's wards. He looks after them after the death of their father. So I'm also considering the idea of perhaps writing a book about them, which would probably be a YA, a young adult book. I haven't decided which direction to go in. I'm not sure which way I'm committed to. It's a change of genre, it's a change of emphasis. Or, the slightly easier route is to just go with Isaac in London and some of the other characters still back in Spain, and the stuff that might go on there. Because the interesting bit of that is that, anyone who knows about the history of the period knows that Catherine of Aragon came from Andalusia to marry the prince, and now I've forgotten his name. He became Henry VII and was Henry VIII's brother, so she married him. So that's the bit of it that I'm thinking of latching onto and creating a story from that. But as I say, I'm just not sure which way to go at the moment, or to write something completely different and have a go at something contemporary, or write something else. I don't know, and be like Alex and write a thriller or something.
Do you like the idea of writing in a period where there's maybe more records, more access to information that you can use? Or do you think it's been nicer not having, not being able to access that time period for accuracy?
Yeah, well, part of my hesitation about doing it is not exactly that, but it's about also, has it already been done? Because Philippa Gregory has a set of books about that period. There's a self-published guy whose name escapes me, David Pennington, who's written something similar about that period. But from a writer's point of view, it's the advice you're given is you need to do something similar but different when you're writing genre fiction. So it's got to be similar enough that readers will latch onto it and feel comfortable with it, but give them something different. So that's what I'm wrestling with, is can I give them something different?
Well, nobody's going to write it the same way that you do, no matter how many people have tackled one subject. We must see in crime fiction, some things become tropes, maybe because we've seen them so much. But when somebody puts a spin on a trope, that's just a magnificent thing when you don't see it coming.
And that's the spin. That's the thing that, how can I make the point of difference? What am I going to come up with? What writers or authors are tending to do now is think of more diverse characters, neurodivergent characters, different gender. People have been doing that for about 10, 15 years now. Andrew, I can't remember his name. So do I do something like that? Or can I think of something more organic that springs from the book? I don't know. I'm at a stage where I'm just mulling and thinking, because last year was the busiest year I've ever had as an author. I'm not going to say it's the most successful, but it was the busiest because I republished or had republished the first two books, which involves obviously a certain amount of editing and work from me. The Red Citadel was published as a new book. And as you know, I edited with Alex Shaw, the short story collection Arabian Noir. So I'm kind of reeling a little bit from that year of being extremely busy continuously for a whole year. So I'm kind of
maybe your brain's not ready yet. Maybe you need a bit of processing time.
Yeah. And that's the thing you have to kind of think about. And it's also the natural break I've had with the end of the trilogy now, because I planned that out 5, 6 years ago to have that completed by 2023. So it's a kind of big milestone achieved. And you kind of anybody naturally, when they get to that point, wants a bit of a breather, I suppose, in whatever walk of life you're in.
One of the things that has sprung to mind because Alex has joined us, you two have had an interesting weather week, shall we say. Interesting might be the worst choice of word. But,
amazing, really.
Yeah, there has been, we always kind of discuss the weather because I'm in Manchester and it's cold and wet most of the time. There's actually some sunshine today, behind the clouds. Obviously, there's still clouds. It's Manchester, but it has finally stopped raining. So you've had completely the opposite.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cliche. I mean, whenever I talk to anybody remotely over the last few years and say, "Oh, I'm in Dubai," so everyone says, "Oh, ha ha ha, the weather must be really nice where you are and everything." And I explain, well, actually, we do have 4 seasons, sort of. It gets extremely hot, but then for 6 months, it's extremely nice between October and about May, 25 degrees. It's really nice. We hardly ever have any rain. So earlier this week, I mean, I think it's become a global story as far as I can tell. I mean, I've had people contacting me from across the globe asking, "Are you okay? What's happened?" We had, I think it's officially now 2 days of annual rainfall in the UAE in a day. So we are very, very fortunate here in the house that we're in that we've hardly had anything, just a few leaks, nothing to get excited about.
Right.
But in the roads surrounding me, we couldn't get out for 3 days. I couldn't move the car because the water was so deep. The road that runs around the back of my house was littered, and I mean littered, with cars that were abandoned.
Oh my word.
We couldn't actually exit the community we live on because the road was flooded. And again, that would have been for about 3 days. But we are lucky compared to a lot of people. If you've seen some of the videos of stuff that's been going on in central Dubai, and people have been stuck in their cars overnight and things like that, that's been reported on the local news. It's been very difficult for people, and the cleanup is ongoing. And it's a freak weather event. I mean, it's just a freak weather event, which people put down to global warming or whatever. I've got no clue. But they do happen. I mean, people are saying it's unique and never happened before. I've been in the Middle East long enough to remember 15 years ago, there was a huge monsoon in Doha in Qatar. And people are often surprised when you say, "You do know that it snows in Saudi Arabia, don't you?" And people go, "What?" So, this stuff does happen from time to time in the Middle East.
That's the thing, when it's kind of a flash flood as such, there's no kind of warning to prepare for it.
To be fair, we were told 36 hours before it happened by the government that it was going to happen. We were told to stay at home. Schools were closed for 2 days. So to be fair, we did have some warning, although I tend to, and probably Alex does as well, whenever we hear this, we say, "Oh God, if this happened in England, we'd be closed 3/4 of the time," because they tend to close things for the smallest bit of rain here. But this time, my sarcasm, my cynicism was very much misplaced because they were absolutely right to do it.
So did you do anything to prepare for it? Was there kind of a rush on the shops and things like that?
Say again, the last bit.
No kind of rush on the supermarkets and.
Well, that's interesting. I didn't do anything to prepare for it because I just thought, oh, it'll just be one of those things, and there'll be a bit of rain, and it'll be okay. But on the second day, when we went to walk to the shops and get some food, it was like a post-pandemic shop with only half the stuff left on the shelves. Partly, I assume people panic buying, but partly it's just the delivery's not getting through.
Yeah, of course.
But in the whole scheme of things, we haven't suffered anywhere near as bad as some people have had it. So I'm not going to complain at all. And in the end, it's just one of those things, and we survived, and the clear up seems to be going quite well, and we move on.
Yeah, interesting though. There must be some story fodder in there somewhere.
That was, strangely enough, yeah. As a writer, that's one of the things I started to think about. There must be something in there. I haven't developed anything yet, but I'm trying to start writing some short stories, so I'm sure there might be something in there to write about, but I'm not exactly sure what yet. I have to think about that.
You mentioned earlier about the prize for blood libel. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so in Dubai, there's quite a well-known festival that happens every year called the Emirates Festival of Literature. And they have a writing prize, which is awarded by, judged by Luigi Bonomi, who's quite a well-known agent, I think, in the UK. So I entered that just on spec, really, as an extract from Blood Libel. And I was fortunate enough to be one. I wasn't the prize winner. I was one of the 5 prize winners that year. It was a very big moment in my writing life to get somebody to take my writing seriously and go, oh, actually, you might have something there. So, it's the old thing about validation, about someone thinking that there's something worth rewarding or something worth acknowledging. So that gave me a big boost. And it also allowed me to then the following year, once I'd finished the book, to go to the festival and do a reading alongside some other authors and sign a few books and all those things that aspiring writers hope to be able to do one day. There wasn't a long queue at the desk. There were only a few people, but it's one of those things that you enjoy doing and hope you can do. So that was a big boost to my belief in myself that I could be a writer and I could write something that people would actually want to read, want to spend time with, want to spend their money on. Because at the end of it, that's all what it's about. Can you get people to spend their money and, more importantly, spend their time engaging with what you've written and enjoy what you've written? Because that's kind of the whole point for me, really.
So you talked a little bit about the social media aspect of the job, and how much time do you think you devote to that now compared to when you first started? Because obviously there's a lot to learn.
Because I came through self-publishing, I spent about a year to 18 months learning everything I possibly could about self-publishing, taking courses on Jericho writers, talking to people, reading stuff, because the decision I made very early on was that if I was going to write and publish, I wasn't just going to stick it up on Amazon and see what happened. 0 point in that, not bothering. Why am I doing that? So I spent a lot of time learning what you're supposed to do and a lot of time doing social media. I have no claim to be an expert on it. I do not spend as much time now as I used to or as I should. I've never really got to grips with Facebook properly. Alex has. I think he uses it a lot more effectively than I do. I've got reasonably good at Twitter, but I don't have a huge following. And I think Twitter has got increasingly hard over the last 2 years when a certain person took over to get any visibility or any acknowledgement or any traction of anything. And I don't think I'm the only one saying that. I think there's quite a few people saying that.
Yeah.
But what I do find good about Twitter is the writing community on Twitter. I'm quite assiduous about blocking anyone who contacts me for spurious reasons. So I managed to keep my Twitter sphere quite small in a way, but that it's writers and readers, the occasional reader as well, but mainly the writing community, which I do find helpful, do find supportive, and is a good network to be a part of. So I don't have a negative view about Twitter overall. I think it's been useful to me. The other thing I've tried is a mailing list, which I did very, very early on, which works quite well, actually. It's probably the most successful bit of, if you want to call it social media, that I do, because that gives you the direct connection to readers. Apart from that, no, I'm not as expert as I should be. But I think the other problem is, and I think most writers will say this, that there aren't any specific solutions on social media. You've actually got to be across all of it and have a presence across all of it, and just keep plodding on and doing stuff every single day with bits of it and engaging with it, and eventually you'll build an audience of some kind.
It's the thing, it's
But
not just thinking about the post, is it? It's maintaining interactions and all of that, which for my own stuff, I just don't do anything. Everything I do is to promote authors for the book club. So and I very much enjoy that, but to have to come up with my own for myself, I find it very difficult, the idea of treating myself as a client, which I suppose is the way you've actually got to do it.
yeah,
Think outside of it. But yeah, I don't envy
yeah.
you, kind of trying to balance all of that.
No, you're absolutely right. That I haven't actually thought of that or heard that said before, thinking about yourself as a client, which is true. But it's also part of that writer-author distinction, isn't it? You've got to think of yourself as an author, and you're promoting the author. You're not actually promoting the writer as such. Once you've written the book, you become the author, and you've got to promote yourself as the author. And the way you put it, client, is actually a very good way of thinking about it. I'm not totally comfortable with it. But you can't, well, you say you can't avoid it. I mean, it depends. I mean, I think some authors do have success without, being on Twitter all the time and Facebook.
But generally, they would have a team, wouldn't they, to do that for them? So that's the thing. You can avoid it if you can afford the staff.
Yes. Yes, and obviously, my sales don't accommodate being able to have a staff. You are a staff of one. And even if you've got a publishing company, a big publishing company behind you, which other authors like Alex, he's got HarperCollins behind him. But, that doesn't let you off the hook anymore. It might have done 15, 20 years ago. It might have done. I don't know. I think it possibly did. But you still got to keep doing stuff. You have to keep doing stuff all the time. And it does become relentless. It does become difficult. But the most satisfaction I get is from interacting with people on my mailing list, and I do get regular emails from some of them. Some of them become real fans, and we've had conversations and discussions, and that's where I get the most satisfaction from that engagement, rather than someone liking a post on Twitter, someone that you've never heard of and never engaged with again. So that kind of real engagement is the most satisfying.
You said about kind of 15, 20 years ago it would have been quite different, and I mean there weren't the social media pros and cons that there are now, so it makes you wonder just how did we find out about different authors. I think a lot of it was word of mouth.
Yeah, and I think actually word of mouth, and I've heard other people say this as well, is still where it's at, albeit mediated by social media, albeit the Goodreads group or the Readsy group or whatever it is, that word of mouth, rather than the more superficial stuff of what goes on Facebook and Twitter, I think actually it's essentially the same, but it's different channels to it. And whereas before, say 15, 20 years ago, you had the newspaper, the local radio, your book club, I'm trying to struggle to think else, what would it be? The library book club, maybe, a few friends. You've now got multiple channels of that stuff coming at you. And so in theory, you've got multiple ways of getting access to people, but so is everybody else. And there are also many, 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 many more thousands of books being published than ever was. I mean, the competition is insane now.
Yeah.
I suspect 20 years ago, authors might have said the same. But I mean, Amazon has obviously changed the game completely.
Very much so, yeah. Sarah's saying that she recommends books when she sees people looking at books in the shops. It's quite interesting. If I go to, for example, Tesco with my husband, I'll go and have a quick look and see, which authors I know, who I might not know, what's been really popular that people are talking about, and kind of keep an eye on it. it is interesting to see, but I think I'm a little bit more shy about the idea of going up to somebody and saying, "Oh, I've read that and it's excellent." I think you hear
Yeah,
these stories of people going up to people and having these wonderful conversations and people being really grateful. I think I'd be the opposite. I think I'd feel like I was bothering people.
yeah, yeah. I'd feel the same as well. I mean, I probably wouldn't do that. I've occasionally gone up to authors at festivals and things. I've done that 2 or 3 times, and
Yeah,
yeah, have a
that
quick
I've
chat with them.
done. Yeah,
Yeah, but you're kind of supposed to do that, aren't you? But going up to a random stranger and saying, "Oh, I've read that. You should read it too." I'd be worried I'd come across as a bit creepy, really.
Sarah, you need to give us some tips on how you're confident enough for that. We
Confident enough
clearly
to
need
do
some advice
about which one? The going up to
about
strangers.
going up to talking to people to recommend books.
Oh, I certainly wouldn't do that to random strangers. Oh, no, 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 no. As I say, I'd feel creepy if I was doing that. I wouldn't do that.
I don't go out often enough to make that very useful, to be fair. I
Well,
tend to be kind of here in this chair at this desk,
we don't have enough
where most of my life
bookshops.
is spent.
We don't have enough bookshops in Dubai to actually have a high chance of having that kind of. We have a few bookshops which are more stationers than bookshop, and we have one fantastic, huge bookshop in Dubai Mall called Kinokuniya, which I don't think you have in the UK. It's in the Far East and the Middle East. That is a massive bookstore, but that's the only one really in Dubai, possibly in the whole of the UAE actually, that I'm aware of. That's what I would call a proper bookshop. The rest of them are like Borders, but it's not like Borders used to be. It's Borders with stationery plus books. It's like WH Smith is.
I got quite a shock going into WH Smith about a year ago, and seeing that they really didn't have many books anymore. I was really surprised. And my husband
Well,
said it's been like this for years. It's just that you don't go out, so you don't know.
you're too busy
Just didn't
reading.
know. Yeah, did not know.
Yeah, yeah.
Quite
But
a shocking thing when you walk into what used to be your favourite bookshop and there are no books.
I mean, that's the great thing about London. I don't know about Manchester, whether Manchester's similar, but the number of independent bookshops and beautiful small, you know, bookshops like Daunt Books or the independent bookstores that are still surviving and thriving. And that's the special thing about those kind of books, and the people in those bookstores, the booksellers in those bookstores, are fantastic. I mean, you can go in. I've been in there with my son and said, "Oh, he's just read this. Can you recommend anything else that might go with that?" And they come up with stuff and they get it off the shelf. And yes, you pay a couple of more quid than you would on Amazon, but you've had this wonderful conversation with your son, and he's gone away and read a book he never would have read, and then he talks to you about it, and it's like, oh, okay, that's quite a good idea, actually.
That's worth a couple of quid.
Yeah, the simple things. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I
Um,
miss that kind of stuff. Yeah.
yeah. Sarah's saying only when she sees them with a certain book in the hand and she's read it, that's when she'll walk up and say to buy it.
Yeah.
But I think I'd be fine if I was in a bookshop to recommend something to somebody, but maybe not confident enough to go up to somebody in Tesco or wherever else.
Yeah.
I think I'll leave that to Sarah. You were talking just before we came online about a research trip you'd had recently to Spain.
Yeah, call it research. Yeah, I just spent I think a lot of writers, or historical fiction writers, use this as a excuse. Yeah, the original genesis for the series was when I went to Seville 16, 17 or something. I can't know, 2013. And I found out about the blood libel. If anyone doesn't know about that, what that is, the blood libel is the name of the first book, but it also springs from there is a belief, or was a belief, particularly amongst Catholics, that the Jews engaged in a practice of killing children and using their blood to make matzo bread. So that's called the blood libel. It still exists. It's still gone on today. You'll see that phrase used. So I found out about that in Seville because something had happened in Seville along those lines. And that's where the first book in the series sprang from. I haven't been back for a while, so went back this year to go to Seville and Granada. The reason to do it at this particular time and this particular year was Seville does Easter like nobody else in the world does. They take it very, very, very seriously. And the city kind of shuts down for a week. They have huge floats which travel through the city at snail's pace on the shoulders of 40 or 50 men. They are all men. Intricately designed, hugely expensive, real gold, really well tailored costumes on pictures of the Virgin Mary, scenes of Jesus Christ on the cross, etc., etc. It's multiple locations across the city. It is extraordinary. It is amazing. It's claustrophobic. It's extraordinary. Have a look online and you'll see what I mean. So we went there for that, and then we stayed on another week and went to Granada. Granada is the last remaining most important Muslim city in Europe. It's important because the Alhambra was a Muslim fortress, and then the area behind it, called the Albaicín, is a intricate neighborhood of small alleyways where people still live. It hasn't been turned into some kind of Disneyland with lots of postcard shops, and it's still a thriving, genuine community where people live, sometimes in caves. There are houses made out of caves. It's Sacramonte. So it's a very good place to look at for my research. It's as authentic a place as I can go to. I get more out of that kind of trip than going to museums. I'm a bit of a, I don't know, I don't really get a lot from going around museums, really. So I get more from going on those kind of trips. Plus also there's some food and drink to be had as well, so why not? And quite a lot of decent sunshine, although it rained there as well for the first 3 days. We were caught in a downpour there in Seville, very unusual for the time of year. And we also went, part of the reason in Dubai that's sometimes a bit difficult is it's very polluted. So we went to Seville thinking, oh, it would be lovely fresh air. And they had a sandstorm from the Sahara because they're quite near to the north of Africa. So their air was all polluted by the sandstorm from Africa. So you can't get away from it, the rain and the air pollution. So yeah, partly that was to think about what I would do with the next books, what would occur, what would go on the compost heap, we toured the Alhambra, which is massive and which I would recommend to anyone. It is a special place. And I don't know what will come out of it. I'm not somebody who goes on research trips and takes notes and writes lots of stuff and thinks about it. I just try to absorb it and see what appears, see what emerges on the other side. So I'm not quite sure what will emerge from that yet. We had a good time, and let's see what happens.
I think it's interesting that you don't take notes. Do you have a really good memory? I think I would constantly be scribbling.
I used to have. I used to have a really good memory. I mean, I think exceptionally good memory. It's not so good as it used to be. But what my memory is still good at is for making connections between things that I want it to make connections between. So when I start writing the next book, it will link. If it needs to got to refer back to Granada, and I need to think about what I saw, what I heard. So what I'm doing on those research trips is really listening, thinking, smelling, hearing, seeing, imagining whilst I'm experiencing it. So what is also special for me is to go to the Alhambra and go to places where I've only imagined and where I've set scenes and think about Isaac, Isabel, Alejandro standing there. So those connections will be made for me, and
Mm.
I'm pretty confident they'll be made afterwards as well when I come back to the writing. Yeah,
I do like that.
Because it's a holiday,
Mm.
essentially, I don't want to turn it into work. But I also find I get more from just being open and absorbing and being aware rather than spending my time. I mean, it's like, I mean, this is going to sound dreadfully old-fashioned and curmudgeonly of me, but I think people who take lots of pictures constantly and videos when they're on holiday all the time, you know, put that down and just look at it and just watch and just see. By all means, take a few pics, but you see people who, you know, take pics and take videos of the whole thing in front of them. And I just think, you know, just watch, just use your eyes, just use your ears, just use your imagination, just listen and take a
The
few
funny thing
pics.
is, I was going to say exactly the same thing about trying to balance taking notes and things without being behind my phone all the time and experiencing it through a small screen when it's literally just in front of us.
Yeah. Yeah. So I go for that. I think it works. But I just don't want to be with the family. I was with my family, my wife and my son, and just sort of making it an actual work trip is, I don't know, just doesn't feel right to me either.
I can understand that, especially if you were walking around talking about all of the history of the place and, you know, things that
Mm.
you could do with it.
Mm.
And if it's not their area of interest, I could imagine that not being the ideal family holiday.
Yeah, I mean, I did take the opportunity to show off here and there and give a bit of information and give a bit of knowledge and things. And my teenage son was reasonably tolerant for, you know, a certain period of time. Then he got fed up. I tried to do very small doses, very small doses.
Fair
Like
enough.
the writing, you know, very small doses.
I think for a long time I put my children off reading because I was constantly talking about books and I always got a book in my hand. There's always, you know, at least a couple of books in whichever handbag I'm currently carrying, anything like that. But now they all really seem to kind of like the things that I've been talking about all these years, slowly drip feeding. But yeah, you
Yeah,
do have to learn when to wax lyrical and when to just shush.
yeah,
How is the you're the chair of the Gulf chapter of the CWA, the Crime Writers Association. How is
yeah.
that going at the moment?
We've had a little bit of a lull. Well, for Easter partly, and for Eid here, because of
Mm,
Ramadan and Eid. It's a big holiday here, the celebration at the end of the fasting month. As you know, as I said on the previous podcast, we've published Arabian Noir, which is a collection of short stories. We're thinking about what our next project might be.
mm,
We've got a couple of new members to come along, so we've now grown from one to, I think we'll be six soon. So we're growing in slow increments, and we're considering whether we might do another anthology or whether we might think about trying to do some creative writing classes in the UAE for people who want to do crime writing. I mean, it's quite interesting in a way culturally. Probably you know this, that the vast majority of people in the UAE are expats, about 80 to 90%, whether they're from Britain or from India, Philippines. But the locals, the Arabs, 20% of them, they are interested in writing, some of them, but they tend towards science fiction, horror, poetry, and magical realism, actually. So crime is not a popular genre as such, which is interesting. I don't know the
mm.
reasons for that. I don't know why. I should ask somebody, I suppose. But they tend towards those other genres, horror and fantasy. So we just wonder whether we might be able to do something to promote crime writing in that way, and if nothing else, we might learn some stuff about people's tastes in books. Because that's the thing about doing these projects, you end up meeting people, learning stuff, and you know you enjoy doing it and see what happens at the end of it. So as I say, we're growing slowly. And we'll see what happens, and we'll see what we do with the next project, whether we can take on another anthology or do something different. Not quite sure yet.
Yeah, as we said last time we were talking, you learned a lot doing the first anthology, which would hopefully make it a more streamlined process for you the second time, because I know how much work went into that and how exhausted you and Alex were after it. And you're trying to balance that on top of, you've both got children, and, you've got families, and you're working, you're writing, you've got other things to do. And then you put this project on top of everything else. I'm not surprised you're all a bit wiped out at the end of it.
Yeah, I was pretty naive about that, actually. I'm blaming Alex for all that. I was quite naive. Yeah, definitely blame Alex. I was quite naive about the amount of work and the issues that came up with authors, with wrangling 12 authors, let alone a publisher, let alone the social media, let alone the connection with the festival. And you just think, oh, this would be a really good thing to do. This would be a really cool thing to do. You don't quite think it through, but now I do know. So yes, you're right. We've learned some stuff, and we'll do it better next time.
You've got kind of a template for next time now, haven't you? Knowing exactly how much time things will need. And plus, with it being the second one, you'd hope that the people like myself who bought the first one, are going to come back and look, because it's just full of great stories.
Hope so. Yeah, I mean, I hope, these anthologies always, not all stories are going to appeal to all people, but, you'd like to think that, everyone who buys it will find at least one story that they really think is good, or one author that they want to then go on and investigate and have a look at. And that's the whole point of the anthologies, really, is it's a taster, and it's a look at what the breadth of writing there is across a particular time in a particular region. So I think it's of interest in that way as well. I think you'll always find something in a short story collection that you like, or you want to move on and have a look at. Yeah.
You might even find that, like you say, you find a new author, but you might not want to pick up an entire book from an author that you've not heard of before. But obviously, like you say, a taster in an anthology is just such a great way to build an audience. Yeah,
agreed. Yeah, absolutely.
So we are almost out of time. We've got 3 minutes left. That's absolutely flown. Do you want to just remind everybody about the Isaac Alvarez series?
Yeah, okay. So the Isaac Alvarez series, I think you've got it on your shelf behind you. I've got it here as well.
And we were talking just before we went online as well, what beautiful cover it is.
Yeah, and that's the Alhambra there.
Yeah.
That's the Red Citadel, the Alhambra. And that's book 3 of the trilogy. They are all, my publisher has foolishly left them at 99p at the moment on Amazon. So as I keep on saying, you can have all 3 for less than the price of a coffee now. But I'm sure the price of a coffee in England is £3 or more now, is it, with inflation? But anyway,
I think the paperback was just under a £5 when I bought it. So that was that's really good price for anyone who's looking for something different.
Yeah, and if you like crime, historical crime, you want to go to a slightly different time period not time period, but a slightly different place in a time period than the usual Tudor stuff. Not that I didn't mean that. Then I think it's worth a look. I've tried to make it slightly different in the sense that it's about a family and what happens to a family in horrific circumstances, and how they survive in various ways, and how the crime gets solved by Isaac, or doesn't get solved, maybe. So that's the idea of it: a family in a particular historical circumstance, and a man fighting for his survival and the survival of his family. That's what it's about.
And like I said, I've not quite finished it yet, so I'm intrigued to see how the ending ties things together.
Great.
But yeah, really enjoying it.
Thank you, Sam.
I didn't really know much about that kind of time period, so it's really, it's a really interesting thing to go through, especially knowing how much of it is even loosely based on something real. It's quite the skill to weave those together. So thank you for coming.
Thank you very much
to everyone who's who has watched and dropped comments in as well. And I hope you'll come back and talk to us once you decide what you're going to do next. And we've got something else to look at with you.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you very much, Michael.
So much for having me on. Bye, everyone.